When you need mealtime inspiration, it's worth shopping Kroger for thousands of appetizing ingredients that inspire countless mouth-watering meals. And no matter what tasty choice you make, you'll enjoy our everyday low prices. Plus, extra ways to save, like digital coupons worth over $600 each week and up to $1 off per gallon at the pump with points. So you can get big flavors and big savings. Kroger, fresh for everyone. Fuel restrictions apply.
This episode is brought to you by Microsoft Azure. Turn your ideas into reality with an Azure free account. Get everything you need to develop apps across cloud and hybrid environments, scale workloads, create cloud-connected mobile experiences, and so much more. Discover what you can create with popular services free for 12 months. Learn more at azure.com. That's AZURE.com. And sign up for a free account to start building in the cloud today.
I'm Phil Kitramalides.
And I'm Sid Lowe.
And every week we bring you the latest from La Liga in the Spanish football podcast. Sid, this season's going to be amazing, isn't it?
We've got Kylian Mbappe at Real Madrid, Dani Olmo at Barcelona, and Julian Alvarez at Atletico.
Don't forget Nico Williams at Athletic Club as well.
And definitely don't forget Leganés. Their mascot is literally a giant cucumber.
Hear all about it every Monday in the Spanish football podcast.
Thanks for choosing this free Anfield Index podcast. If you'd prefer to listen to this or any of our other shows without adverts, then now's the time to check out Anfield Index Pro. With AI Pro, you can supercharge your entire listening experience. You'll not only get all of our podcasts without the ads, but you'll have them far faster with our Quick Publish feature available exclusively for subscribers. AI Pro also puts you in the heart of our sound studio, with an option to listen to many of our shows live and interact with the podcasters in real time as the shows are recording. Upgrading couldn't be easier. AI Pro is available on all popular podcast platforms. Just head on over to AnfieldIndexPro.com and get started today.
Welcome to AI Scouted on Anfield Index Pro. I'm Dave Hendrick, joined as always by Mr. Karl. How are you, sir?
Eagerly anticipating eating pasta.
Liverpool take on Bologna on Wednesday night in the Champions League at Anfield. Our second game against an Italian team, obviously successful outing in Milan last time, beating AC. But this is a different type of test, Karl. Now, Bologna last season were one of the surprise packages across Europe. You put them in a box, I think, with the likes of Girona, with Brest, with Stuttgart, where they kind of came from nowhere to get into the Champions League. They were a little bit fortunate that Italian teams were allowed 5 into the Champions League last season, because they did stumble a little bit towards the end of the season, only winning 2 of their last 8 games, and that ended up costing them a top 4 finish with Atalanta jumping them. But they still finished 5th and got through. But then they had quite a tough summer. Their manager, Thiago Motta, left. He decided to take up the challenge at Juventus. He was replaced by Vincenzo Italiano, who had been with Fiorentina, gotten to back-to-back Europa Conference League finals, losing both. They also had some players departing. Most notably, I suppose, Joshua Zirkzee going to Manchester United and Riccardo Calafiori going to Arsenal. They did bring in a bunch of players. Emil Holm, who was at Atalanta last year and was quite good. Jens Odgaard comes in. Cambiaggi arrives from Atalanta. Delinga comes in from Toulouse, who we faced last year. Martin Ehrlich comes in. And Benjamin Dominguez is another big signing. They also loan in Nicolo Caselli, Samuel Illing Jr. from Villa, who'd been at Juventus. He's proven in Serie A. And Tommaso Pobega of AC Milan and the Italian national team. So a lot of churn at the club this summer, I should say, between the manager and the playing staff. What were your thoughts on them? Let's just start before the season began. What did you think of them from what you saw last season, and how did you think all the changes would affect them coming into this season?
So, I mean, last season we did speak about them a couple of times, especially towards the end of the year when we were looking at either who would be in the Champions League or which managers might be on the move, that kind of thing. So they were really, really impressive, certainly in the second half of last season. I really liked the structure of the team that they had. we referenced several times, and they didn't necessarily have a standout performer, let's say, in an attacking sense. It was very much like a team-wide ability to break into attacking areas from different positions, that they had several goal scorers who could contribute. Obviously, Mota was a big part of that, and obviously then we know that there's been a lot of churn, like you've just said, but I don't really have oodles of sympathy from that perspective, because they knew about Mota leaving months and months beforehand. So they had plenty of time to assess, not just obviously for a new head coach, but in terms of playing staff they thought they might leave, had time to speak to them, certainly should have had enough time to get everything in order, that they had alternatives if they thought they were going to lose people, that kind of thing. So certainly from the coaching staff perspective, and being in the Champions League, maybe expected a little bit better from them to sort of manage that changeover from Mota being there. On the other hand, in Italy is a very changeable league in general at the moment. We're just in that kind of generation where Serie A is capable of having a team finish 8th and then 2nd and then 5th and then 1st and then 12th. And it's kind of just what the league is at the moment. It's open for people to challenge if they get things right. But equally, if you don't manage to hold on to those players, or that happiness or the togetherness of the squad, or you choose a different direction, it's really easy to drop down quite a few places, to be honest. Now, they've not been like a pushover this year or anything like that, but I think they'd probably have anticipated a couple more wins than they've managed, a draw away to Como, home to Empoli, that kind of thing. So it's not been a great start to the season for them, but similarly, they're not like being beaten all over the place either. So if I would imagine that they feel if they can get through probably a sticky up and down, inconsistent kind of first few months of the season, they feel they might be all right to go again for at least some sort of European spot. But yeah, like I said, it's a difficult thing to do in Italy at the minute, just because it's so changeable.
Yeah, I mean, we've talked this a few times. There's no great team in Italy, and there hasn't been for a few years. There's an awful lot of parity. It's probably the most open of all of the big leagues, where, going into a season, Milan, Inter, Juve, Napoli, Atalanta, Roma, Bologna, Lazio, they'll all look at it and think, we can get top 4 this year, or in a lot of those cases, we can win the league this year. And maybe it's a little bit foolhardy with some of them, but it's not outside the realms of possibility, because there isn't that standout team. And, you look at this season for Bologna, they drew on the opening day with Udinese. Now, they had started really well. That's tailed off recently, and they've dropped to 8th, have Udinese. They lost 3-0 to Napoli in Naples, but Napoli are now top of the league. They drew with Empoli, as you said, but Empoli have had a really good start to the season. They're one of only 2 teams who are unbeaten, and they currently sit 6th. They drew away with Como, and at the time that looked bad, but Como have now turned their season around, and they are sitting in 10th. They're playing quite well at the moment. Then they beat Monza away from home. Monza are in the bottom 3. And at the weekend, they drew at home with Atalanta, who, like themselves, have not made a particularly good start to the season. I think defensively, Serie A looks a little bit like the Premier League did last year, where just nobody really is defending all that well, bar Juventus. Juventus yet to concede a goal, by the way, through 6 games. And Empoli have only conceded 2. Everybody else is conceding a lot of goals. Like, you've got Milan and Inter with 7 each through 6 games, Torino with 8, Lazio, Udinese, Como, Atalanta, Hellas Verona, Girona, Lecce, and Monza. They've all conceded double figures through 6 games. And in some cases, you've got Parma there, only 5 games played, but 9 goals conceded. So likely that they'll tick over into the double figures as well, as could be the case with Cagliari, who've only conceded 8. And when half the league, or more than half the league, have conceded double figures after 6 games, it really doesn't point to that being a strength of the league, which is quite unusual for Serie A. The other factor, I think, for Bologna this season is they've just had a couple of unfortunate injury knocks. And, they've had players that have missed games and players that aren't available to them. if you look at like Lewis Ferguson, who's been so key for Bologna since he joined there and he's been elevated to club captain, he was really good at the past 2 seasons. But he picked up the knee injury in the summer, and that's obviously a massive blow for Bologna not to have him at his best, available, scoring goals and offering a lot from midfield. He's not going to be back until January. So if you're taking out the number 9, arguably the best midfielder and undeniably the best defender out of any team, that is always going to have a significant effect on how they perform on the pitch.
Here's a little question for you, a slight side tangent, as we like to do, obviously. When we were talking there at the beginning about, Serie A, and if you do well, you can do well in that league. If you don't do well, you will drop down. It's quite like football in general, but the bigger leagues used to be. Is that fair to say?
Yeah.
Is it fair to say it's how football is supposed to be? Like, leaving aside questions of quality and, the defensive incapacity that you're talking about at the minute, would you say in competitiveness terms, that's what it's supposed to be?
I think so. If you look at the Premier League, right, everybody talks about the big 6 or the big 8, but realistically, City have an enormous advantage over everybody else financially. Now, Newcastle could potentially gain that advantage at some point in the future, but because of the rules that were put in post-City, they don't have it now, and that is that they're backed by a country. When Roman took over at Chelsea, they were backed by a country. Whether Roman wants to pretend he was a private citizen or not, there was Russian money that was flowing through to be laundered at Chelsea Football Club. Then you have, massive gaps between, say, United and most of the rest of the league for many, many years. It's always been the case in the Premier League since, say, Jack Walker, where if a very rich individual is willing to pump a lot of money into a club, they can create an unfair playing advantage. That's not really ever been the case in Serie A. They also haven't had the enormous influx of TV money that the Premier League has had, which is quite odd in some ways. They did have it in the 90s. There was a lot of TV money. There was a lot of interest in Italian football from outside of Italy, but the English interest largely came because Gaza went there. None of what we got with Gazzetta Football Italia or any of that ever would have happened if Gaza hadn't gone there. And it's strange that there's so much American interest in the Premier League, but very little interest seemingly in Serie A, despite the fact there's an enormous Italian-American community who are rabid fans of Juve and Inter and the Milan clubs, or the Rome clubs and Napoli and whoever else. So it's weird that they've never gotten that overseas TV rights thing done well. But if you look at the last, let's say, 35 years of Italian football, there's only been one spell where one team just completely dominated everybody else. And that was Juve in that run that started under Conte and came to an end when they appointed Pirlo. Other than that, it's always been very competitive. And, you can look back at teams like Capello's Milan, Lippi's Juve, a lot of good Inter teams in the 90s. They were, spending the same type of money as the other clubs. You had that great Lazio team that won the league, the Roma team that won the league. Then you had Capello's Juve, you had Carlo's Milan team. You had those Parma teams through the 90s and early 2000s. You had some really good Fiorentina teams, some really good Sampdoria teams. It always felt like there was a bunch of teams there that could win major honours. Maybe there was only 3 or 4 each year that could win the league, but you felt like there was a raft of them that could win the cups. You felt like there was teams like Parma, like Sampdoria, like Fiorentina that could maybe go into Europe and win a Cup Winners' Cup or win the UEFA Cup. And so you had...
I feel like if
When you need mealtime inspiration, it's worth shopping Kroger for thousands of appetizing ingredients that inspire countless mouthwatering meals. And no matter what tasty choice you make, you'll enjoy our everyday low prices. Plus, extra ways to save, like digital coupons worth over $600 each week and up to $1 off per gallon at the pump with points. So you can get big flavors and big savings. Kroger, fresh for everyone. Fuel restrictions apply.
It just felt so competitive, and it still feels that way now, even if the teams aren't of the same caliber. It just feels like there's a real group of teams that could win things, like we saw Atalanta last year. With England, it doesn't feel like that. It feels like there's maybe 3 or 4 clubs that could win of all the competitions they're going into, bar the Conference League that no one cares about.
Yeah, I think if the period we just mentioned there, just after Fiorentina, let's say, after Parma, but then when Roma was still big, Milan's was still there, and a few of the others were around as well. If, let's say, over-the-top streaming and a little bit more technological advances had been half a decade earlier even, Italy might have gone on to be the dominant force just because of where they were at that time in football.
Yeah. I mean, you look at Serie A from 86 to 06, so from basically just post-Heysel, when English clubs who had been the dominant clubs in Europe were banned from Europe, all the way through to Calciopoli, when Juve got hammered, obviously Milan got hit, Lazio got hit, Fiorentina got hit. There was a real dark cloud kind of went over Italian football after that. And people kind of started to assume that there was just...
I don't need a VPN. I've got nothing to hide. This is what I used to tell myself before I hooked up with LibertyShield.com. Not only is my home internet now fully encrypted, but I can now access all the websites I want, whenever I want, and do so from absolutely anywhere. As a Liverpool fan, I love to know I can now watch every match, regardless of whether it's on UK TV or not. My Liberty Shield VPN makes sure nothing is blocked and guarantees me super fast streaming speed throughout that match. You can get connected right now with their software package, which includes a 48-hour no-obligation free trial and instant access to their apps for Apple, Android, Fire TV, PC, Mac and Android TV. Or go a step further like I have and get one of their pre-configured VPN routers. These small but powerful devices allow you to easily connect every device in your home to VPN, making it the perfect solution for smart TVs, Mac boxes and games consoles. Visit LibertyShield.com today and use coupon code AIVPN25 to get 25% off at checkout.
Levels and levels of corruption and whatever else going on, which of course there was with the referees. There's no doubting there was match fixing going on, but like we don't know for certain that none of that stuff ever happened in England. We don't know that there wasn't huge levels of corruption. We currently have a team that have won 4 Premier League titles in a row and 6 of the last 7 facing 115 charges. So like that's comparable to what happened with Juve, but the thing is, it doesn't feel like when Juve got dumped out of Serie A, it felt like it was like a gut punch for the whole league. If City get dumped out of the Premier League, it doesn't feel like it will have any real kind of negative effect on the growth of the league. Because I think the Premier League, what they've done is they've done an incredible job at marketing the league globally. And you've also got these incredibly rich businessmen that have come in and bought the top clubs and realised that the potential is there as the league grows to grow the clubs individually as well and to each of them sort of ride the momentum of each other. So we've seen great commercial growth with Liverpool. We've seen it with United, obviously, very early. We've seen it with Arsenal in recent years. They're starting to get a lot more savvy in terms of building their brand. It doesn't feel like the Italian clubs ever bought into that idea of marketing the league and marketing the clubs as individual brands, almost as if that was a little bit distasteful and beneath them. And it does kind of feel like they missed the boat there because, like, if you think back to, the 80s, the 90s, we were all fascinated by these Italian clubs, by Juve, by Inter, by AC, by Lazio, Parma, all these different clubs. You're fascinated by these players. And if someone had offered you a jersey of one of those clubs, you would have taken it gladly because it was cool. There was a coolness to Serie A that I don't think the Premier League has ever had. And yet they never bothered to really market themselves outside of Italy. It was always sort of a thing of, we're not going to come to you, you need to come to us. Whereas with the Premier League, it's we're going to bring our product everywhere. I think that's where the real difference has been. And as a result of that, you've had those bigger clubs, especially Liverpool, Arsenal, and United, who are the three biggest clubs going into the Premier League era, being able to grow exponentially with the Premier League. And then obviously the influx of dirty money into certain clubs has sort of enabled fake growth of City. And fake is not the right word, but it's not an organic growth of City and Chelsea. Manufactured growth is exactly it. And it doesn't feel like Italy's ever had any of that, because it's almost like they view it as beneath them, which is fine and it's admirable. And I agree with you. I think the league should be as competitive as this. I think this is great for football to have a league that's this balanced and this even and this upset prone. But ultimately, I mean, I know there's been a couple of Italian teams in European Cup finals in recent years, but am I right in thinking Inter Milan under Jose is the last Italian team to win the Champions League?
As I can think off the top of my head.
And we've had multiple winners from England. We've had multiple winners from Spain. We've had multiple winners. We've had our winner from Germany and multiple finalists. And I know there's been, a couple of Italian finalists, Juve twice, Inter once. But it does feel a little bit like they've been left behind on the European front as well. Like they're not winning the UEFA Cup most years. We've seen Spain dominate that competition. I know Roma won the Conference League, but we've seen West Ham win it. We've seen Olympiacos win it. It just doesn't feel like Italian football has that same foothold in Europe now as they used to have, and that's in part because the league has dropped off in terms of high-end quality. But I do like the fact that there's a lot of middle-of-the-road quality. There's a lot of teams that would probably be like 5th to 8th in the Premier League, but they're the top 4 in Italy or the top 6 in Italy.
Yeah. I mean, Italy, or Italian clubs, we should say, had 9 Champions League European Cup finalists between 89 and 98. And then since Inter last won it, which was 2010 now, so looking a decade and a half come the end of this season. Since then, they've had 3 runners-up.
Yeah, Juve twice under Allegri, and then Inter under Inzaghi. England have won it as many times in that spell. We won it, Chelsea won it, City won it.
Chelsea won it twice, so 4 times.
Chelsea won it twice, yes, so 4 times. Yeah, sorry, Chelsea won it twice. And there's been multiple final losers. United lost it the year after Inter. City have lost a final. We've lost 2 finals. So 8 finalists. They've had 3. It wouldn't even be funny to start counting up the Spaniards because they've had such a period of dominance. So yeah, United won final because the other final was before Inter. Yeah. The first Barcelona United final was the year before Inter won it because Inter knocked out that Barcelona team in the semi-final when Jose did madness. So yeah, I do really like the fact that the league is competitive. And you look at it now, Bologna sitting 13th, Atalanta 12th. You'd be in no way surprised if you looked at the league table in 2 months and both of them were in the top 4. Because that's just how changeable things can be. We saw AC Milan against ourselves and we thought, God, they're not very good at all. And then they went and beat Inter in the league game just after that. And that Inter team had looked really good against City in the week. So it's just a very changeable level. There's a high degree of variance. among each team. Like look at Napoli as a prime example of this. Napoli win the title in 22-23. They look absolutely spectacular. They've got 3 pillars in that team that look elite. Kim Min-jae, Victor Osimhen, and Kvicha. Kim leaves. Obviously, the manager left as well. There was a couple of other smaller changes, but Kim leaves, and all of a sudden they collapse last season, and they finish 10th. They don't even get into the Conference League. And this summer they bring in Conte, and 6 games in, they're top, and they look really good. They don't like they've just binned off Osimhen. One of the best strikers in the world. They just said to him, "We don't want you anymore. Go away," and they sent him on loan. And yet they're flying. Imagine if City had turned around to Erling Haaland in the summer and said, "You know what? We don't like you anymore. Why don't you go to Turkey on loan for a year? And we're going to bring in a good goal scorer, but a very frustrating player. We're going to bring in
Darwin Núñez.
Darwin Núñez. That's what we're going to do. We're going to replace you with Darwin Núñez. And we still think we'll be fine. We actually think we might improve." Like, that's basically what's happened there. It's ludicrous. Absolutely ludicrous. And you're right, Guy. Conte would bid Haaland for Lukaku because he absolutely loves the fella. On to, do you know what else is funny? Here's one for you. Do you know who the top scorers in Serie A are this season? There's 5 players with 4 goals. Can you name them?
For this current season?
For this current season so far, there's 5 players with 4 goals.
I know Thuram has.
Yeah.
I think Juve doing well, so Vlahovic, presumably.
Yeah.
No, he's out injured. He's injured. Milan Leao's have been doing well, so not him.
No, it's not him, but it is a Milan player.
There is a Milan player.
Yeah.
Pulisic?
Yeah. You've got 2 more to get. One of them has played in the Premier League, and the other moved late in the transfer window to replace an Italian international that got injured.
Oh, Retegui.
Yeah,
I did actually. And former Premier League
legend, Karl, a player we've talked about on this podcast before.
So 7 some appearances, 62 minutes in total, and no goals.
Close.
Go on.
Close.
Who's he?
Patrick Catrone.
Wolves stalwart.
Heroic Wolves legend. That's a little more robbed, in fairness, for nearly a year, so we'll give him his dues. Che Adams has 3 goals in Serie A so far this season. That is...
I forgot.
Yeah, that is almost his Premier League tally for his last Premier League season, 22-23, where he scored 5. I like Che Adams, though, but...
I'll take the 4 out of 5, given those names.
Yeah, absolutely fair. But yeah, like, it is just a thing where it is a very even league. Like, there's no standout team. There's no one you're looking at and thinking, God, there's 5 or 6 that team would get into our team, for example. Like, there's a couple from Inter that you'd take for certain. There's a couple from Napoli. Well, there's one from Napoli that we'd take. Maybe there's another one. Yeah, maybe there's 2. There's a couple at Milan that are really interesting. There's a couple at Juve that are really interesting. But there's no one team that you kind of stand back from and look at and think, wow, like, what a group of players that is. And I kind of feel like that's a good thing.
Yeah, it definitely works both ways. Like we said, it's definitely more competitive than it has been previously, more competitive than a lot of the other European leagues. There's a lot more uncertainty, and if we're being completely honest, a lot more possibility to improve than in the competition we're actually playing them in the Champions League.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, like, so their first game of the Champions League this season, they played at home to Shakhtar Donetsk and drew 0-0. We're very fortunate to get a 0-0 because Sudikov missed a penalty in the 4th minute. So, like, when you look at the results overall, they've played 7 games, they've only won 1, but they've only lost 1. So they're having an issue scoring goals. That's kind of understandable when you take out their number 9 and their kind of best goal-scoring midfielder, 1 sold, 1 injured. But defensively, they've been pretty decent, although Napoli did slap them 3-0. You know, no one else has scored more than 2. The only other team that scored 2 against them is Como, and they'll be really disappointed by that one. Like, that's not a result that Bologna were coming away crowing about. They were disappointed with that one because at the time, Como looked like certain relegation fodder. But overall, like, they haven't been bad. It's just that football is a very much expectations get set on what you've just done. So they had a really good season last year. People set really high expectations for them and ignored all the context of the manager leaving and all these different players moving about. And so they're being held to a standard that isn't really the standard that they belong at because, you know, prior to last season, they weren't a team anybody was talking about as a top 4, top 5 team. Prior to last season, they finished 9th in 22-23. Season before that, they finished 13th. Season before that, they were 12th. And the only reason people were talking about them for a couple of seasons while they were playing in, you know, the bottom half of Serie A is because the recruitment was quite interesting. Because they brought in the likes of Tomiyasu, they brought in the likes of Nicolas Dominguez, they brought in the likes of Aaron Hickey and Joshua Zirkzee and players like this. And then obviously there was the very sad situation with Sinisa Mihailovic, who was their manager and looked like he'd beaten cancer and then it returned, and unfortunately he was forced to step down and ultimately passed away as a result of the illness. But like, nobody was looking at them as a team that had real ambition to win or to win many games and get into Europe, certainly not into the Champions League. But expectations get reset constantly in football. It's just the nature. And therefore people are looking at this season and they're being very critical of them. Whereas I actually think if you want to give Italiano his due, I think he took over a pretty difficult situation. A team that played a very specific style of football under Motta, who's got a really unique way of looking at the game, and was losing, you know, star striker, star defender, and, oh, by the way, midfielder and club captain ruled out for 6, 8, 10 months, depending how long his knee takes to heal. I think overall he's done a fairly solid job to keep them in mid-table.
Yeah, like I said at the start, it's not like they are losing games. There's just a lot of draws in there at the minute. So it's not always the case like a new manager coming in takes over from a position of strength, but it was, relatively speaking, versus, you know, a sacking, that was the case this time. So I think it's reasonable. It's been like a stabilization. It's been, like I said, not being beaten. He's changed things around where he needs to. Slightly different approach. Terms of off the ball setup and everything. So it's far from a devastating start. Just the 12th, 13th in the table. It's not the end of the world, is it? Let's be honest. It's a different setup. It's a different target, let's say, season. But like I said, if they can get through, let's say, end of October into November, and they're still not losing games, they're still sort of in and around a few of those matches where they're playing teams who were around them last year. No reason why, with a bit of settling down, bit of familiarity, 1 or 2 players back, they can't continue to have a decent season again. Like if you're, let's say, mid-November into December in the top 8,
yeah,
fine. Like you're on for a decent season again, and you can, maybe with a signing, maybe with fitness later on in the season, push on for European places. European football 2 years in a row, that's pretty exceptional.
It is. It's absolutely exceptional. And like, the league is so tight and condensed. Yes, they currently sit in 13th place. There's 3 points off 6th. They're 4 points off 3rd. Like, it's really early. It's really tight. You look at Como, they get the 2-2 draw with Bologna. That moves them off the bottom of the table. They were 20th. They moved to 18th with that draw. They win the last 2 games and all of a sudden they're in 10th. And the outlook for them looks completely different. Because after 3 games, people are writing them off and saying they've got no chance of staying up. And maybe they will go down. But, you know, for now, they're giving themselves a puncher's chance. And Bologna can do the same thing at a higher level. They can give themselves a puncher's chance at Europe again. And like you say, I mean, this is Bologna we're talking about here. This is not one of the elite clubs in Italian football. Again, a club that, you know, in my time watching Serie A, the most notable thing that the only time anyone really paid attention to them is when they had Baggio. And that was kind of it, up until this recent run over the last few years. Because of the Mihailovic thing first, and then obviously the recruitment was really interesting, and then what Motta was able to do. But this is not a club that's had enormous success through their history. This is not a club that's used to playing in Europe at all. They played in Europe in 65, and they were in the European Cup. They won the league in 64. That's I think the only time they won the top flight in their history. They played in the Cup Winners' Cup a couple of times. They played in the UEFA Cup once. That was through the 70s. And since 1975, they were in the UEFA Cup 3 times. Since 1975, this is their 4th season in Europe. You know, Baggio got them in the first time in the UEFA Cup in 98. I think Pepe Signori got them in the next year with his goals. But other than that, they've been largely irrelevant for years and years and years. They've been relegated multiple times. They've largely been a team in Serie A who finished in the bottom half, other than those couple of years with Baggio and Signori.
Hey guys, it's Eddie Gibbs from Anfield Index here. I hope you're enjoying this podcast, and I'm sorry to call time on the show before it ends. In the current climate, it's tougher than ever before to offer podcasts for free. At Anfield Index, we produce over 75 free shows every month, which I'm confident is unparalleled in the LFC sphere. Whilst we'd love to offer everything for free, the production costs now make this impossible. That said, we don't want to follow the model of other channels and lock all of our content behind a paywall. So what we've decided to do is to continue offering every show for free, but cut that offering to 30 minutes on our longer shows. So to get all of our shows in full and enjoy the best of everything we have to offer, we really hope you'll consider supporting the channel and signing up at AnfieldIndexPro.com. For about the price of 1 cup of coffee, you'll get every podcast in full with 0 ads. You'll also get access to our LFC VIP community, where you can enjoy live podcasts, engage with our podcasters, and chat with other Reds in real time. So that website again, AnfieldIndexPro.com. Join today.
This podcast is part of the Sports Social Podcast Network.